honor and privilege to introduce to you His Excellency Laurent Bili, the Ambassador of France to the United States. Ambassador Bili is a graduate of one of France's grandes écoles, great school, which means he's very bright indeed. He joined the French Foreign Ministry in 1991, where, except for a brief stint in the Ministry of Defense, he has worked ever since. His areas of focus have included inter alia, European affairs, disarmament, culture, education, international development, and defense. After working in Paris, Ankara, Turkey, and Brussels, Belgium, he served as ambassador of France to Thailand, Brazil, China, and now the United States, meaning that he has lived and worked in major countries on 4 continents. If you are an American of my generation and went to public school, you will remember that we studied American history in the 5th, 8th, and 11th grades. Among other things, we learned that France is the oldest ally of the United States, and that without the aid of France, we might still be part of the British Empire. To this day, we Americans are grateful to France. Please join me in giving a warm Rotary welcome to the ambassador of our oldest ally.
After such an introduction, it's very hard to speak. What should I say? But I've got my doubts about the fact that the USA to be still part of the British Empire. But it's a good story. Well, so where are we today? As you have seen, I've been covering some space in the last 30 years in my career as a French diplomat. And that's probably one of the toughest moments that I've been contemplating. I was, of course, listed that I start my career just after the fall of the Berlin Wall. So it's the collapse of the USSR, so it changed a bit the perspective. It's 2 years short, but still, it's a dangerous moment. Obviously, with the war in Ukraine, with the Middle East. It's also a moment which is challenging because of the difficulty for the West sometimes to have this message about rule-based order well understood. It's so difficult because the world is changing, technologies are everywhere, and we are living in a world of all new technology. And that's maybe on that point I want to elaborate, because in that kind of world, the aliens, even the old one, have got a certain value. And when it comes to France and the US, I think that our economic ties are one of the key elements of our relation. Numbers are quite good. France invested something like 326 billion US dollar in the US. Sometimes because saying that we are looking a lot toward China. Yep, it happens, but we are 8 times more investment in the US than in China. And the US has been investing also in France, not as much as France in the US, so there is still some work to be done, and we'll come back to that. But in the last years, especially when the president organized the France Summit to boost investment in France, the US firms were the first one to be present. And when I arrived in New York, there was some fancy dinner, and I was very comfortable because I didn't need to teach about investing in France because it was US CEO doing the work, doing my job. In fact, they were so enthusiastic about the climate of business in France these days. That's it to my second point. It is that in this really, I think one of the elements of President Macron's legacy is really about turning France as a more business-friendly country. And it has been a very consistent policy in the last 6 years of reform. Not always easy. You may have seen that on the news, but the direction has always been very clear, and it has been covering a lot of ground since the most evident one on taxation. This is always an issue. We are back on corporate tax at 25%, so very much in the average of the OECD countries. Production tax have been dropped by 10 billion, but we also reform labor law to make things more predictable for investors in kind of case of layoffs. For the time I'm looking also that not that I'm an employer in the US, I see that the US is not that an easy country. It's not so many legal issues when you have some difficulty with member staff. Also investing a lot in the future, and we have a huge plan of investment. We identified in the project, which is called from 2030, 56 billion for three technology key sectors. 28 billion have been already engaged, and basically we want to be a leading European countries in renewable energy, green transition, and you know that we are also in a much better position than many partners due to our choice in terms of energy mix with a big size of energy being relying on nuclear. When you look at France also today and in comparison with other countries, I think we are recognized by, I was mentioning that with some very big CEO of the US as a country with, of course, easy to live. We don't want to trade that gastronomy is still good in France, but also a country where infrastructure are quite a good shape. And just when I take the train to go to New York, I say, wow, they really need high-speed train here, like the one that we have between Paris and Lyon. I shouldn't say that, so I should be diplomatic, but still. Sometimes people forget also that we are a country of engineers. I was in a conference the other day explaining what an amazing job of engineer is the Statue of Liberty, which was built very enough part by Eiffel and the Eiffel Tower. But I think the engineers and the quality of the R&D in France, which is also linked to one of the most attractive package in terms of tax cuts, is really appealing. But maybe for someone of my generation, which is more striking, is that we have a new generation of French, young French people who are quite different. In my time, to go to the Grande École, to be a civil servant, was somehow our dream. And I think that our young generation discovered everywhere a word in French for entrepreneur. You know, they were 20 years ago. Some say that we didn't have a word for that in French. And so we are the generation of entrepreneur, and in French we say, of course, entrepreneur. And we have something like a 29 strong, a very vibrant ecosystem of startups. We may probably still facing difficulty in terms of venture capital, but Paris is becoming also the most important financial hub in Europe. And part of my job is also to facilitate that connection between the two sides of the Atlantic. So I will say that I'm quite optimistic that that bond, which is very important between France and the US, and more largely between the EU and the US, is there to last, because we are living in a world when these alliances are more important than ever. Of course, there is some bad wind, protectionism. It's happening both sides, I would say. These days, probably more on that side, but again, I'm diplomat, so I'm not going to say that. But anyway, we are working on it like our allies. So we have the recent EU-US summit. There were a lot of discussion about more transparency. It's a kind of support that we are bringing to our companies, and also to make sure that at the end of the day, we can be working together on like challenges. I can continue for a while, but I think it's more interesting for me to answer to your questions. We have seen that I've been covering some interesting countries. My first job as ambassador was in fact Thailand. It was a really challenging one. My second was Turkey. The third one was Brazil. The fourth was China. I left in 18th of February, so it's still a recent memory. And now I'm very proud to have that new challenge in the US. More comfortable one, obviously, but still challenging. And I hope that I can count on your support on that mission. Yes, that's an easy day. So, Niger, obviously, the situation, you are very right that we have decided to withdraw forces. It was unsustainable to stay despite that in principle we don't recognize a new authority and that the President Bazoum didn't ask us to withdraw. It's a very sad situation. We had a president well elected, doing the right job for his country, but probably moving the line and provoking some unsatisfaction by some players, maybe three, but probably also others. That's part of life, and we are also to face in Israel after 10 years of war, kind of war fatigue and the idea that somehow France didn't solve all the problems. And that's very correct. In fact, we have been supporting the country, but there is things that you fund as a foreign force. And despite the fact that our mission in Niger and Sahel, in Mali, and other countries were very comprehensive, like including a lot of work in the field of education and the field of development. The reality on the field were that we could contain the jihadist movement, but we couldn't do the work for the government. The government, it was between the population, especially in the northern part of this country, which felt also excluded. And it has some are looking for easy solutions, like some are using Wagner, which doesn't play really by the book of the law of war and as a record of atrocities against civilian population as a way to solve the issue. We can't be on that game, so we have to deal with the consequences. We have a comprehensive review about our military presence in Africa. We are there anyway supporting government, legitimate government, and if we are not welcome, we are just out. And since somehow France is becoming the scapegoat for many of the difficulties, it's also seen the wider reflection about the future of our military presence on a permanent basis in Africa. We'll see the outcome, I suspect, in a few weeks. But it's quite a paradox, like 60 years after the independence, the French bashing and the French France as a scapegoat is much stronger. And it's a link that we can do with other subjects, and that's also social networks and disinformation, fake news, fueled also by other countries. But to name Russia, we can trace a lot of disinformation coming from Russia and from other players, but Russia being one of the first one. So that's part of the picture of the world which is changing and which makes also our life more difficult. On AI and on the fact that we use in advance, I suspect when we say that it's in advance, it's because we have been having some discussion within the EU on a different set of regulations, basically saying that what is not allowed in the real world shouldn't be allowed in the artificial intelligence. We have a word in reverse in French, so it's a bit challenging. France is investing a lot also in AI, and we are very cautious to avoid also kind of interpretation where EU, France will be about regulation and the US about innovation. And we really want also to be able to have France as one of the hubs for innovation. So we are very cautious, but I see also that on the voluntary commitment that has been taken by some big players in the AI field, we are quite close in terms of direction of what we are doing on both sides of the Atlantic are thinking. It's still work on process. I had a discussion with the chief scientist on the Meta on the AI, and I like one of his. Sometimes, especially when you come from humanities and you speak about AI, you get the impression that you are very far of your zone of comfort. When he was so about AI, shortly the definition, AI is what we don't know yet. So I suspect we need to know better, but we are advancing, and we know that there is risk, but there's also a lot of things to harvest. On climate change, EVs, and protectionism, obviously, that's part of the story. But certainly, you have seen probably that in Europe, um, Chinese are saying that there is a French legal principle where the issue there is an investigation on subsidies on the AEV vehicles coming from China. And we have been so tracking subsidies in a way to make sure that they are climate neutral, which have a consequence of giving an advantage to nearshoring, let's say, and also the use of clean energy to produce electric vehicles. So obviously there is a part of maybe willingness on each side of the Atlantic to protect our producers, but also an idea to avoid unfair competition and also negative externalities like bringing EV on our soil for fighting climate change, whereas the condition of their production has been fueling some of climate change. On China and how is it possible or appropriate to defend our values? I was once in a hearing by your parliament on China. I had a question about one MP asking what I was doing, if I was tough enough. My first line of answer is, sir, I'm not working in Switzerland. I'm working in China. I was even surprised, but we managed to have our activity on Weibo, which is basically Facebook. Anyway, one of the main platforms, the internet. During for 1 year, we have been fueling our website with a lot of information about the war in Ukraine, and even engaging. They really engage personally, debating with netizens, as they say, on the internet. That some of our posts we have 17 million viewers, so it was really having a certain presence, even if in China 70 million is not exactly the same thing as 70 million in France. I can confess that. But it was possible to say things, possible sometimes to be efficient enough to be attacked quite easily. And so we had also to measure the moment where we were approaching the closing of our account. So we're trying to play with that. We have been also trying to work with public on, of course, cultural public, and through these windows, we try to do things like basically on the penalty, LGBTQ situation. I was meeting with the human rights lawyers, and especially the lawyers of the lawyers who were in jail for defending the human rights defenders. I'm preparing for the new generation of the lawyers of the lawyers of the lawyers. But so it's of course challenging, and you don't do it, but it doesn't mean that you could, but you can't do anything. And I think it's important for us to use all the margin that we have to to be present because that's part of our say DNA, and if we don't do that, better to do something else. I start to answer with all questions. First on Putin, Middle East, as if I shorten the question. We have to be also cautious in not attributing all things on Putin responsibility, but at the same time acknowledging that Russia is very good at taking advantage of any situation. So I don't think that, for example, Russia was behind the coup in Niger, but they have been very good in exploiting it. And obviously, in the Middle East, we have seen suddenly Russia using the situation in Gaza and the double standard sticking points as an illustration that you see it's the same thing. In Ukraine, the war in Ukraine didn't start last year. It was an ongoing war like it is in Gaza, and we see the same double standard. And they are very good at using this kind of situation everywhere. On World War III, we are living in a different, difficult world, and one shows one. I think our job is to avoid that we go there, but obviously there is so many zones of conflict that we have to watch closely to avoid that the speculation bring us where we don't want to come. On the pension reform and the way I speak about it, I think it's an interesting thing on French sociology is that we have the passion for equality and the way that feeling at certain moment that it's unfair, but also it's very often the one in the street are the ones who are opposing, and you have also kind of silent majority. People are not comfortable in time of unrest, but after the pension was implemented, the rate of approbation of the president went up. And I think it's interesting because people recognize also the determination and that the leader at certain moments is there to implement reforms, even if they are not that comfortable. Probably we were not very good, I'll say, because on that subject I really share the idea that it was necessary in explaining the reality of demography, and that the reform was not a reform for to suppress or delete welfare state, but somehow to make it sustainable. And that was really what is about the reform, and probably what makes the issue of our system of pension reform, which is quite generous, always at stake, because there is a reality of the demography, and we have to adapt it to reality, and especially to life expectancy. But I think it's a good, again, on your question, I would say that it's also a sign of the resolve of the French government to implement reform, to have a functional state, and I think it works. I mean, I was even joking today that I've been struck by the Economist having again a positive article on French economy. It's suspicious, and usually they're not paid for that. And making a good comparison with Germany, which is even more rare. And I think the previous one was a comparison with Britain. So as well, something is going wrong in that world. On the COP23, usually diplomats prefer to make predictions for what is coming in 20 years' time, because then we are in a safer ground and less witness about our failures. It's a challenging COP, obviously. There is some hope on initiatives on other, but I don't think it will be a very big breakthrough. We'll see more different kind of coalitions, and no, maybe not yet bigger change, especially because what we are expecting will be new national determined contribution by countries which are not yet there. So I've been cautious on my expectation, but I have to confess at the same time that I have a colleague following the issue more closely than I do, and probably more knowledgeable. So let's say that we can have a good surprise. At least we will achieve something. On San Antonio, the Spurs, I think we are very happy. It's a chance for us to have an ambassador like MB. It's an amazing player. He's so young. He's modest as well. He confessed that he's learning, and he will be in DC in January for his a game, and I hope that I will have a chance to meet him at that occasion. We have also a player in DC, which is Bilal Koulibaly, which is also a young talent. And so I think yes, we are very lucky to have young nationals which are so talented, and especially in a game which is so popular in the US.
Our club has a tradition. We give all of our speakers an honorary tree. We plant a tree in your honor, and you can locate your tree. Here's a certificate, and there's a GPS coordinates on here, so you can actually find it, and you get a pin for your lapel for that. And we also would like to make you an honorary member. So we have already uh, made that happen. So you are now a member of our club. And thank you so much. This is your pin. That's your pin that's like this. So you can come anytime you'd like. Thank you very much.